Kum Len and Black Gemara. We are up to Masechta Moed Katan Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph on top of the page. There are two ways of how to learn the Gemara about to learn, and it has many ramifications in halacha. Okay, Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said, we learned where Rashi learns and some of the Rishonim. Shmuel says that mekable kiboilus, if you hire someone by contract, the last thing we learned yesterday was about an oval. He's not allowed to do work, but it depends if he's contracted out to others or not. If you do something by contract and you hire someone by contract on Shabbos to build a house for you, so when the idea of a contract is the person is really working for themselves. So if it's within the tchum, the Jewish neighborhood, also is forbidden because Mara sign. People will think you hire them on Shabbos itself. Others learn, people will think that this person is not on contract, this person is just an employee and you are paying him to work for you on Shabbos. But outside the Jewish neighborhood, you're allowed to, because really, in theory, they're not working for you. You're giving them $100,000 to build your house. They can build whatever they want at their own leisure. So therefore, they choose the days that they work. Whatever day they work, they're doing it for themselves. So if it's outside the neighborhood, nobody's going to suspect it. Nobody knows that is being worked on Shabbos, and therefore it's permitted. And so obviously see how important it is. Even if it's outside the Jewish neighborhood, there's no other Jewish neighborhood there. Another town nearby. There's another Jewish town near that big construction. Also is forbidden because it's still a problem of Maris Ein. And when we say if it's outside the Jewish neighborhood, there's no Jews live in that area, that is permitted. Because it's not common for people to go there. People travel about, and therefore they can actually see what's going on. Also, we don't want people working Chol Moed either, unless it's a dover of it, will incur a loss. So therefore, it is also. So then Rashi asks a question. So in the Jewish neighborhood, you're saying that's permitted. So how come we learn Gemara? It's forbidden. How can we learn Gemara Shabbos that you're allowed to give your clothes to a launderer on Friday, even though he'll clean on Shabbos because doing it on his own time? It's in the Jewish neighborhood. What's the difference? So Rashi, the difference is that people cannot tell by looking at the clothes whose clothes they are laundering, whether it's Jewish clothes or not Jewish clothes. But shaking a house, they know exactly whose house it is. Rabbeinu Tam writes, elsewhere that the difference is that everyone knows by a launderer that that's how it's done. You pay for the not for the time, but for the job, and they do whatever they please. By shaking a house, the many people do it as employees. So for Rabbeinu Tam, it comes out that if you know for sure that it's a contract, that it's a kabul, that it's kablanus, then you are permitted to do it. They're permitted to do it. Others learn, before we go further, others learn this has to do with Avelus, nothing to do. We're not talking about Shabbos here at all. Shabbos is forbidden even by contract. You're not allowed to have anybody working for you on Shabbos. And here what we're talking about here is Avelus, if you have it under contract. So how come over here we make a difference in the Jewish neighborhood or not? So the Baal HaMaor wants to say there's a difference between kablanus and kiboilus. What we had previously was kablanus. Kablanus is where the person not only is on contract, a sharecropper. He has a share in this property itself. So partly it's owned by him. That's why even in the Jewish neighborhood, it's all right, but they can go ahead and do the work. Here, we're talking about kiboilus, building a house for you. They have no share in the house, but they're getting paid for the job work, for the piecework, rather than the time. And that's very different. And that's why it makes a difference in the Jewish neighborhood or if it's not in a Jewish neighborhood. Okay, let's continue. The Gemara. Mazutra, the Gemara tells us how fathers go. Mazutra, after he built himself a beautiful mansion, it was done in a front of a contract, but it was done outside the Jewish neighbors. Talking about it on Shabbos, where Rashi most people learn. Equal Safra happened to go. They refused to enter the house because it was built on Shabbos. They refused to enter the house. The others say, "Who nami loy al begabe?" Forget about Safra and Huna Bachina. Forget about them. That he himself, that Marzutra himself, did refuse to enter the house. Says he, "What? Why? What's the problem?" Answers the Gemara, "Adam choshev shiny," like we had yesterday. That if a person is a person that everyone looks up to, has to be much more careful And even though halacha it's permitted, he has to be more machmir. Same over here. Not everyone understands the nuances. It's a contract, not a contract. They see that goyim build a house for you. They might learn from you and think you're allowed to. Or you could amri, or as we'll see later in today's Gemara, that how careful they have to be, because even though what they did is correct, other people don't understand, and they're going to replicate what you're doing, and they'll do it the wrong way. It'll be, in a way, you take a little responsibility for that. Others say, in this case, it's different because he actually brought them straw. He brought them the product. Forget about paying them the money for the piece. He actually brought them the product, even though he didn't tell them to work on Shabbos. But the fact that he brought them the product and it worked on Shabbos, he felt like he had his items were there, done in a manner that was forbidden. Rav Chava, he allowed the people who take care, wait on the tables and take care of the table, fix up, repair tables. Omar, he says, Kiva the Agil Kashokli, they don't get paid for what they do. All they do is they eat as a result of that, and therefore part of that is to do maintenance. Therefore, it's not really considered work, but less labah. That's not called work. That's not called payment. That's not the same thing. So you're allowed to. Tell them what we learned. Mikabli kiboilers b'moyed la soisha la chamoid. You're allowed to hire someone on chalamoid to do work for you after chalamoid in a manner of kiboilers of a contract. So you're doing after chalamoid. Rashi says, talking about a goy. Others say even hiring a yid. But to hire him to work for you on chalamoid itself, you're not allowed to. This is the general rule. Ko shehu aisa, anything you're permitted to do chalamoid, you can ask a guy to do it for you. But the chol she'eno is anything you yourself is not permitted to do. You cannot tell the instructor guy to do it for you on chalamoid. Says the Gemara. Tanya went elsewhere. Mikablin kiboilers b'moyed, you're allowed to hire somebody in a contract on chalamoid. La says la'achar to have implemented after chalamoid, after Yom Tov. Ubevad, how far can you go when we say making a contract or hiring somebody? Don't go and measure it now already, because that means you're starting to work right now. Don't weigh it. Don't count. Don't do it exactly like you do in the weekday. So you work out the arrangements, and you don't. But to work out the specifics, you can work that out later. So what we learned, that you do not cause animals to be impregnated on chalamoid, because that is work on chalamoid. Kiyej was similar. Ein marbiyin b'bchor. What about chalamoid? A bchor you're not allowed to work with, and since we're saying that causing them to get impregnated is considered work, so you're not allowed to take an animal which is a bchor, a firstborn, which is sacred. You're not allowed to do any personal things with it. You're not allowed to go force it to become impregnated by a male animal, or a bchor to impregnate other animals. And you're not allowed to work with a bchor. The same thing with a korban that incurred a flaw, a defect, a mum. So you're not allowed to go ahead. The only thing allowed to do that is tizbach or giza. That what you do is you're allowed to shecht it, but you're not allowed to share the wool. You're not allowed to do any work with it whatsoever. So the same thing, you're not allowed to cause it to impregnate other animals or become pregnant. Tanya learned elsewhere, in another place we learned, you're not allowed to go ahead and force animals to be pregnant in chalamoid. But a donkey, if a donkey is ready and is to become impregnated, you actually can bring a male donkey to it. Why? Because if nothing happens at the time when it's ready, it could be that for a long time now it won't be ready again. It'll cool down, and that is a loss. So we said before that if there's a loss, you're allowed to do malacha on chalamoid. But all other animals, all other animals, you're allowed to bring them into the barn, and then whatever they do that on their own, but you're not forcing them. So we learned, you don't bring an animal into your field in order to fertilize your field. As they defecate and that becomes fertilizer your field. Shabbos is not on Shabbos, and chalamoid. But being bo malay, if they do it on their own, of course you're allowed to. The ain misayein oisam, you don't assist an animal to come into the field in order to fertilize it, or the ain moisin lehem shoymil and also, even if the animals came on their own, you don't get your workers on Shabbos or on Yom Tov to take the animals and lead them across the entire field so that they cause the entire field to be fertilized. Nor do you give them a guard to go ahead and to move your animals or your sheep around the farm. But if Hoya is Shabbos, let's say you hire the guy for the week, so not just for Shabbos itself, and the job is to make sure this field is filled with fertilizer, or for the month, you hire them for the year, or you hire them for 7-year cycle, the whole Shemitah. Then you're allowed to help. They're allowed to go help them because for other places we say that in such a case it's called schar havlah, whatever you're getting paid for Shabbos is included in the rest, and it's not like you hire them for Shabbos. And even help them out, and you give them a guard to go ahead and to move the sheep around because they're not really working for you; they're getting a monthly pay, and Shabbos therefore swallowed it. Rebbe says, B'Shabbos, Rebbe says, on Shabbos itself, if you want to have people want to help out, you're not allowed to pay them for it, obviously, move the animals about for fertilizer, but favor. All you can do is you owe them a favor. That's the most you can do for somebody who does it for you on Shabbos. You're not allowed to pay because then it looks like they're working for you. On Yom Tov, if they move the animal about, you're allowed to offer them mezainis, you're allowed to offer them food. And b'Moed and Chalamoid, you're allowed to offer them b'schar pay. You're allowed even offer them to pay them. That's not really a big bother, so you're allowed to do that. But on Shabbos, all you can do is owe them a favor, and that's it. So that's something tangible. It's not like you're paying them. Says the Mishnah further, just like we had yesterday, that you have your olives that you turned over in a barrel, and now you need to start pressing them. And what do? It's chalambayt, and you couldn't do it any earlier. So we had Machlekes Yehuda said you can do it with a shinui because you're going to incur a loss, and Rabbi Yossi said you can do it open, no shinui whatsoever. Once you're about to incur a loss, go ahead and do whatever you have to do, and you can even seal the barrels. Says the Mishnah, same thing with wine. If you have wine inside a pit, you have wine inside a pit, now you have to bottle them or barrel them, and suddenly you became a novel. You're not allowed to work with a novel. Some other accident occurred, or you have employees who decide not to make an appearance. Zaylif the goyme, you're allowed to go ahead and pour all the wine into barrels, and furthermore, with gof kedarka, and seal them properly. Even Rabbi Yossi, you can go all the way out. No shinu, no changes have to be made whatsoever. Rabbi Yehuda says, oisel loy lemudim. Rabbi Yehuda says you cannot go ahead and seal it the way it's normally seal it. And you just put the boards. It shouldn't. What do you call it? Go off. But that's it. And it shouldn't ferment. You're not allowed to go ahead and go away. Because Rabbi Yehuda said with you before that even if there's a loss, we're allowed to do something to save it, but you're not allowed to. You have to make a shinui. Machlekes, if he's talking about putting that Rabbi Yehuda allows you to put in the barrels and you just cover with boards and not sealing it, or is he saying now you put it in barrels, just cover the vats where the wine is sitting with a board? So what do you need both arguments for the olives and the wine? Is the principles are the same. Whether there's a loss and you're permitted to go ahead and to do work to prevent the loss from happening, whether you have to make a shinui or not. So you need both. Because the loss by the olives is far greater than the loss by wine. I guess wine you have a bit more time up your sleeve; it just goes off a little bit, and olives the oil goes on much quicker. So in the case of the oil, I would say by hikam, but based said because the loss is so great, say there's a much greater loss. Wine, the loss is not that great. Why isn't the loss that great? Either because wine is less expensive, or wine doesn't go off as quickly. I would say, maybe he agrees Rabbi Yehuda, make a shinui. It's not you're not that desperate. Only in this case of here, we're not that desperate. But he comes if only Rabbi Yehuda is here, don't make a shinui because the loss is not that great. In the case of oil, the loss is so much greater. But maybe he agrees Rabbi Yossi that you can go all the way out without even a shinui. Therefore, we need both cases. Who's the one that says that when it comes to on Cholamayit? But who says on Chalamayit? If we allow you to do something with Davra Abed, it's only with a shinui. Is the like Rabbi Yossi does not follow Rabbi Yossi, and yet Rabbi Yossi said halacha Rabbi Yossi. Halacha is like Rabbi Yossi that if there's a loss of Chalamayit, you can do it all the way. You don't have to make a shinui whatsoever. Are you allowed to seal a barrel of beer b'Chalamayit? So we talked about wine. Rabbi Yossi said you're allowed to seal it. What about beer? Well, beer doesn't go off as quickly. Amalu Sinai Amar. Sinai said that's Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef is referred to. We had in the end of Gemara Brachas, Oiker Harim, and Sinai. We said Rabbi Yosef is an encyclopedia, head of encyclopedia. Rabbah was much sharper, but Rabbi Yosef was the head of encyclopedia. And therefore, it's very odd in the Gemara Eruvin. We have a number of times in other places where Abaye reminds Rabbi Yosef that there's a brisa that says differently. You said last time differently. Rabbi Yosef, when he became blind, not only did he become blind, but he also lost some of his memory as well until he got cured again. Halacha like Rabbi Yosef. Even by beer, the halacha is like Rabbi Yosef. That what? That you don't have to make a shini whatsoever. Says the Gemara. Maybe he went to Rabbi Yosef. How do you know? Maybe Rabbi Yosef said that you don't need a shiri b'cham when it comes to wine. Who said he said the same rule by beer that you can just go ahead and seal it because chamra time of mine is enough to say that. So the Gemara says, what's the reason by wine? Because there's a great law. Shikanami is b'pseida. You should know when it comes to beer, there's also loss if you don't seal it. Because Abaye said, my mother who raised me said, bar sheet so a barrel of 6 that contains 6 so. The shayeya and you sealed it is better than bar tamni, a barrel of 8 sub, unless it wasn't sealed. It doesn't keep the fermentation. It doesn't keep the beer well at all. So we see that beer also has to be sealed. He says the rule by kusim. The kusim, we had a big argument of kusim, Meir, and the chami, where the kusim were geire emes or geire arroyas. They all converted because they were threatened with lions. The question was, were they genuine geirim or not? And even those who hold that they were genuine geirim, but over time they found that they used to make this trek to Har Gerizim, and later one of the times the Chacham followed them once a year. They would all go together. There was an Avodah Zarah there on top of the mountain that they used to worship, and that's when they said, like, these are kusim. Now kusim, we're having more psachos of that any mitzvah that they adopted, they were even more stringent than Bnei Yisrael. But their mitzvah they didn't adopt, they didn't care about, including Lifnei Iber. Even though they personally were frum, you can't trust them because they don't care if somebody else, doesn't do right. So therefore, when it comes to kusim, whatever we know for a fact that they kept properly, we can rely on them. And you cannot then extrapolate, well, they're careful over here. Surely they're careful over here. You cannot compare. So the same thing, the laws of Chalamoid. Whatever you say you're permitted, it's only in that case. Don't try drawing similes. The laws of Chalamoid are just like the laws of Kusim. What do you mean? Every law is like a woman who's barren. You can't have children. You can't draw similarities. You cannot compare one with another. For example, Shmuel said, you're allowed to put tar into a barrel that is a jug to pave it. But a barrel, you're not allowed to. You would think, why not? And all the way around. You see clearly here, you're doing the same activity, but one is larger, one is smaller. There's an argument. One of them you're allowed to, one you're not allowed to. The argument is which is what. But clearly, you would automatically think, well, if you're allowed to do this, why can't you do that? You can't do that. You cannot draw any similarities. You have to, just like Yichas Kusim, whatever we told you can do, that's it. It's limited to that. And what is actually the crux of their argument? A larger barrel requires obviously much more effort, but a larger barrel on the other hand is a greater loss. And the question is, we said before, there are two criteria in the first Mishnah. There has to be a loss and there has to be not so much effort. The question is, so what's the main focus? How great the loss is? Was the main focus how great the effort is? So Marchayish, let's say, one of them says the most important thing is the loss, and a big barrel has a far greater loss. So therefore, even though it requires more effort to tar an entire barrel, will nevertheless do that because the loss is greater. Well, says no, the main focus should be the bother. And because the main focus is the bother, this bother is what we are worried about. The bother for a large barrel is too great. For a small jug is better. Abaye says, like Tinin, we also have a rule. We assume Hilchas Moed is Hilchas Shabbos. The laws of Chalamoid are like the laws of Shabbos. In which way? Yesh mehen, there are laws that are potter avolas, just like laws of Shabbos. There are some laws of Shabbos that are only asim midrabanan, so they're potter from the Torah, but they're asim midrabanan. For example, we just said right now that the barrel, when listen, the opinion says you shouldn't go ahead and shouldn't put tar on the large barrel, or the opinion says you shouldn't have jug. You shouldn't do it. But if you did it, it did it. You're not chayiv. Yeah. And so but like you hear, you're allowed to go ahead and do, let's say, the large barrel. That's a chatchila. You shouldn't do the small barrel. That's only midrabanan. Potter avol aser. Second, Ravuna went ahead and he harvested his crop on Chalamoid. Ravuna came along Rabba, the son of Ravuna, and he asked Ravuna, in other words, he asked his father. It says, you'll have to go ahead and grind flour on Chalamoid, only if it's necessary for Chalamoid. But if it's not necessary for Chalamoid, it is forbidden. Anything which has caused a loss, if you don't do it straight away, it's permitted in Chalamoid. But something that doesn't have a loss, also. And then it goes further. The Brisa says, when is all this said? If they're already detached, they're already cut off, they're already harvested. But if something is still growing, I feel coolly of it also. Then the loss doesn't help. You're not allowed to harvest on Chalamoid. So what do you do, Ta? However, it says, if you have mamish doesn't want to have what to eat, then you can go ahead and do everything. You can do all activities. You can harvest, you can bring them together, and you can thresh, winnow, boiler, and separate the taken and grind. Provided when you go ahead and you thresh the peiros, don't your harvest, don't use oxen, don't do the normal way. So he asked his father, so how in the world can you go harvest Chalamoid? He said, and even if you don't have food, it doesn't help. He said, this is a lone opinion. We'll soon see about having or not having food. It's a lone opinion. But we don't pass like it. We hold that even harvesting is permitted if it's to benefit Chalamoid. Tani we learned. Was the name in the name of Rabbi Yasi. If it's already cut off from the detached, I feel make say, even part of it is going to be lost. You're allowed to, but if it's still attached, I feel a cooler of it also, even if it's completely lost, too bad. So the same Rabbi Yasi who was so lenient that he says you don't even need to make a shir if there's a loss. That's only if it's talush. But if it's mechuber, he goes all the way out. He's very machmir. I don't care what kind of loss you're about to incur. You cannot harvest on. So that's a lone opinion. That's Rabbi Yasi. And Rabbi Huna said, but we follow the Chacham who argue with Rabbi Yasi. Says the Gemara. So if you're telling me the author, so he asked his father, tell me the author of the Brisa that says that if it's still growing, you're not allowed to harvest. Follows Rabbi Yasi, and so how can Rabbi Yasi says that you shouldn't use oxen to go ahead and to thresh your field? When Rabbi Yasi is the one who says that if there's a loss, don't worry, don't make any shinui, just do the normal way. So why can't you use paras? Rabbi Yasi, you got his number paras. Why can't you use paras? Says the Gemara. Sorry, part of the question. But then what I was saying, we had a number of times just now. Man, tana shina b'mayi b'davra but who's the one that says that it comes chalamayit and there's a loss? You still need to make a shinui. Is the like it Rabbi Yasi? Does not follow Rabbi Yasi, and you're telling me the author of the previous brisa is Rabbi Yasi, and that's why if it's attached, not a harvest. So why does he say that if it's detached and you need it, you're allowed? If you don't have what to eat, you go ahead and do all the malachas that you want to do. And it says, but don't use paras. Malach. So I'm going to answer back. Hachinam, because the truth of the matter is, on many occasions, if you're threshing a small part of the field, you don't use paras. Not everyone uses paras to go ahead and thresh. Abedi says, do it the way you normally do it, and you don't have to worry about a shini. But the way we normally do it is without paras, and therefore he says, since it's common to do without paras, then don't go and use paras on chalamayit. Says him further. Tell him what we learned. You're allowed to go ahead and grind on chalamayit if it's benefiting chalamayit. But if it's not, if you're doing it for after post yom tov, you're not allowed to. The im tochen. What happens? You were grinding for chalamayit when you needed some chalamayit, but what happened was you had some left over. The question: can you use that? Then it's permitted. You're allowed to eat it after yom tov as well because you did it in a permitted way. You're allowed to go ahead and chop down wood and chalamayit. If you need it for chalamayit, but if you don't need for chalamayit, it's forbidden. What happens when you cut wood down and turn out to be have some leftovers? Is permitted. And case number 3, matilin sheikha b'mayit. You're allowed to go ahead and prepare beer and make beer on chalamayit. But if you're doing it for after chalamayit, it's forbidden. After yom tov, it's forbidden. You make beer and it looks like you have some leftover. These cases in mutter. Why you need 3 cases saying the same principle? I'm not sure. Provided that you don't make a trick. You shouldn't say make a lot of beer and say, oh, I need this much chalmah because you only need 10% of whatever you made. That you shouldn't do. But I mean, that's a question we learned. Matilin sheikha b'mayil sheikha. You're allowed to make beer for your chalmah. on in Chalamoid for Chalamoid, for after Chalamoid, you're not allowed to, after you're not allowed to, Echad Shechet Mori, whether it's being made out of dates, Echad Shechet, or being made out of barley. Even though you have already beer in your house, Madim, you're allowed to trick, you are allowed to make a trick and say, look, no, I don't want the old one. I'm going to take the new one. We're looking more bad as well. You can sometimes make this trick and say, I don't want this animal, I want the other animal. That's how you take two animals out of the pit. First you take one, I wanted this one, then you say, you know what, I'll take the other one. And then you look at it again and say, I'll reevaluate. So you are allowed to do the same thing by beer. A minute ago, the previous Bryce, it says, and the condition, you don't make any tricks. And here it says, you could make tricks. So the Gemara Tanoi is actually an argument of Tanoi. The Tanya we learn, you shouldn't make tricks. You said you're allowed to make a trick. Now, interesting, the tricks are not exactly the same. In the first Bryce, when it says you shouldn't make a trick, it's talking about you only need, let's say, 12 pints of beer and you make 100. And don't make a trick and say, oh, I thought I'll drink the entire 100. In the second case, you're only making, enough to supply for Yom Tov, but you already have stock. And you say, oh, I want something fresh. Because you might be able to argue there's a distinction between these two kind of tricks, and one is worse than the other. But the Gemara seems to overlook that and say that we're comparing any kind of a trick. And so machlekes tonight, if you're allowed to make a trick or not. But the whole thing is rabbanan anyway, so the machlekes. Says the Gemara, Rav when he went and harvested on Chalamoid. Shmuel heard that he was harvesting a Chalamoid. In other words, Shmuel felt like Rabbi Huna's son that something which is attached, you should not perhaps go ahead and harvest. So he was ikbid, he was makbid. What's this? Leim Shmuel kichidos. Like Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yossi by Yehuda that if it's attached, like Rabbi Yossi, that if it's attached, you shouldn't harvest, and therefore he's upset with Rav. Says no. No, this is over there. They're talking about barley or other things. These are talking about grains, wheat, which could have stayed there. There's no loss whatsoever. So according to everybody, there's no excuse to go ahead and harvest chalamoid. No, so how come Rav Taka did it? But Rav my time overdochi. He didn't have what to eat, and that's why he was allowed to. Because in the previous brayso it says, if you don't have what to eat, go ahead and go for it. Do whatever you want. Shmuel, I didn't hear the story. Now, why do you need a brayso to tell you that if you have nothing to eat, you can go ahead and do these things? If the whole thing is rabbanon, especially if the whole thing is rabbanon. So the pshat is, when we say nothing to eat, means from your own product. Of course, you always go to a store and buy things, but you don't have anything in the house. And are we going to be mechayev you to go and buy, or could you? And you have it grown right there in your backyard, and that's a chiddush. It doesn't have prepare whatever wheat or whatever he needs there in the house. You can go ahead and harvest it. You don't have to go out there and buy it. So that's the chiddush. We're not talking about somebody who has nothing to eat at all. It's destitute. So Shmuel, so half of Shmuel upset Rav, like Saimu Kameh, the person who told him the story, only told him a half a story. Didn't bother telling him that Rav had nothing else to eat, and therefore he was allowed to, didn't have anything else in the house, and he was allowed to do that. Or Inami, the same thing we learned just before, Adam Choshev Shani. Right? 3 times we have that even though halacha you can do something, but if you're a choshev person, people look up to you and they don't understand the nuances, you have to be far more cautious and be careful. Even if you don't have what to eat, you shouldn't have done it. What do you mean you should have done it? Obviously, you do have what to eat. Just go better buy than go ahead and do it yourself. Rabbi Yehuda Nafa once walked outside, the chumrus of the medusha with a ring made out of like cedar wood. That's number 1. And either we're talking about a case of muktzah here, or we're talking about a case of whether you're allowed to walk around with it, because there's all kinds of things. If it's different a man or a woman, they're allowed to walk around with tachshitin. If there's a signet ring, it depends. And so that's number 1. And number 2 is the ishte mayim the achim kefela amma. He drank water that was heated up by a goyish chef. It was only water, hot water like for coffee, and he drank it. Shama Rab Ami heard ikpid. Rab Ami heard Rab Yehuda Nasiya, that's Rab Yehuda Nasi's grandson, did this, and he was makbid. He thought that Rab Yehuda Nasiya did the wrong thing. I'm going to say my time ikpid. Why would he be upset? What did the guy do wrong? Because of that ring. Hatani, we learned Hashidim, Manazamim, Atabaz, all the different kinds of, including nosebands and rings, and all the and brooches, all the other kind of what are called jewelry. You're allowed to take them into the courtyard. So it seems more we're talking about muktzah here and carrying, even the others are showing we're talking about carrying here. Whether we're goyzer in the chutzah because you might carry it outside. Anyway, all of these things that are allowed to be carried. So what's wrong? Why can't you have halacha walk around with this ring in the courtyard? And imishum the ishte maya the achem kefel. Oh, you're upset because you drank that hot water that was heated by a goy, and we have a situation called bishul akum, a goy cook for you. And that's the halacha. Kol shenechel k'moshe chai. If a goy cooks up something for you that you could have eaten it raw, so that means the cooking didn't really change anything. Then ain't boy mishum bishul achem. There's no bishul akum. So you're allowed to have coffee and all that. Adam choshev shiny. A choshev, a person is different. He should have been more machmir. He shouldn't have walked around with that drink. And Rashi holds, nor should he have drank coffee there. In other words, there's a big machlekes of shiny when he said Adam choshev shiny is only referring to the case of the ring, or also the case of bishul akum. And halacha as well, there's a machlekes whether Adam choshev has to be more careful and not to even eat bishul akum. He's not in public, like coffee or something from a goyish place, because the fact, even though api halacha is no issue, we're not talking about the glasses itself now. We're talking about just the coffee. He heated up the water is no issue, but you have to be more careful because not everyone understands. I will soon see in the story tomorrow. Say more further. All you need is small little twigs. You're allowed to, when you're cutting off, that small, tiny little, pieces of wood that fall down, and that's all you need. You're allowed to do that. Layit Allah Abaya. Abaya was not happy, and he actually cursed somebody who does that on Chalamoid. Rabashi Havle Abba Rabashi owned the forest for Shonaya in a place called Shonaya. He went to cut it down on Chalamoid. And all these Gemara says that they went. I was wondering whether he actually himself went to chop the wood, or he brought people with him and he ordered them to chop the wood. The way the Gemara expresses it is always that he went and he did it. That all these Amoraim were actually doing all these menial tasks themselves. My daitach. What he said to Rashi, what do you think? You think you're allowed to do it? You're allowed to have a pigeon all you need is a little piece of wood. Then Abaya curses out someone who follows this law. Rashi said, I didn't hear it. I don't agree with Abaya's curse, but I think Hanan is right. So while he was chopping the wood, and that's clearly from here, Rashi himself was chopping the wood, the axe came out of his hand, and Boyi Limifzikil was about to cut through his thigh. He realized that Abaya's curse is still there. Shavkei, he left it behind. And because he realized it's because of Abaya's curse. It's clearly here. Now, this is just amazing. Imagine Rashi was the Av Bezin. He was the greatest. The Gemara says that Teidu Mokamech was an unbelievable tzaddik, right? He was the head of that time. He had an axe in his hand and he was chopping down wood. So in all the cases of the Gemara, when it says that Rav did this, Rav was going there and harvesting his own field, which is quite amazing. These did all these Rabbonim, yet we had no problem in rolling up their sleeves and doing menial tasks. They could have had, Ravashi was extremely wealthy, fabulously wealthy, as the Gemara says in Gittin. And yet, he did it himself. But how Rabbi Yehuda came along, he allowed the Mecca Kisne, he allowed on Chalamayit to remove flax, or the Miktal Kashusa, and he allowed to cut up his so the Mecca Shumshi, and also to remove sesame seeds, sesame plants. I understand why he allowed to do Chalamayit, because there's a need for the Chalamayit. You can use it to cover food, like figs or dates for Chalamayit. Kashusa, the hops. The hops chazil shikra. Go ahead and make beer. Ella shumsh. When it comes to the sesame seeds, my chazi. What do you do with the sesame seeds on chalamayit? Make oil. That takes time. So when it says chazi l'neziasa, no, some of the seeds, some of the small seeds can be used straight away, and you can make oil out of the small seeds, and that's quick. The isbo that's inside there. This is interesting. You see here why Adu Choshev has to be careful. Rabbi Yanai had this orchard, the Mata Zimne B'Chala D'Mayit. It came the time to do the harvesting. He went ahead and he did it, and he cut it down. The following year, and you're allowed to, because now the time, if he leaves it longer, it'll get spoiled. So he did what he was allowed to do. What happened was Lashana, the following year, Sheyua Kuli Alma Lepardesayu L'Chal D'Mayit. All the people in the city, they said, well, last year, Rav Yanai, cut down his fruits of Chalamoid. Chalamoid is the best time because we're not working anyway. So what? You know what? Even though our trees are ready a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before Yom Tov, we're going to wait till Chalamoid to do it then. And Abiyana realized that the reason why they all did it is because they looked at him, they saw him doing it, even though he was 100% allowed to do that because he was about to incur a loss. But people don't understand his nuances, and they thought that you're allowed to openly go ahead and cut on Chalamoid. So the Chatchila delayed all their harvesting and everything else. They're picking the fruits. They waited until Chalamoid. He's after Abiyana. Abiyana then punished himself. That year he decided to make ownerless the pardisate his entire orchard of Hushasa that year. He said, I'm going to punish myself because of me, that's what happened. So the Gemara story here is trying to explain, it seems to me, why we had 3 times in the last 2 days that Adam Chashav is different, that Adam Chashav has to behave beyond the letter of the law if people are seeing. So this seems to be only if it's an open, everybody sees. That people can learn and from you, and they don't understand the intricacies, and they'll think that's open slather. And they will do something wrong, and you have to shoulder part of their responsibility. So that's why all of these things, you shouldn't do that in public. And we have that actually in Shalom. Sometimes we say that Talmid Chacham can do this, but only in the privacy of his home, because they understand the intricacies and the complexities of halach. Saying about it further, Machnis Adam Peiroisa, you're allowed to bring your fruits into the house of Chalmud, because the scale will be stolen. The Shoyle Pishton Mina Mishra, you're allowed to go ahead and draw out the flax from the water. Because it'll give you a loss as a little before. On the other hand, that what do you call it? We don't want you to delay this activity until Chalamoid because you have more free time. The Kulan and all of them, if you deliberately wait until Chalamoid, they do. You have to toss it out. You're not allowed to have any benefit from it. Not only you're not allowed to do it, if you did it, you're not allowed to have any benefit from it. So the Gemara Tani we learned that even though you bring it into your house, we say you're allowed to go up and do it discreetly, because not everyone understands what you're doing, and it looks like you're doing activities of Chalamoid. Rabbi Yosef had these beams. He had people helping him out to bring it in during the day. Abaye said what Tanya says clearly: if you're doing these things, do it discreetly in your house. Should done at night. Discreet for beams is dafka by day. Why? Because it's impossible for me to carry the beams on my own. I need to get a whole group of people. Imagine if I bring them at night. Everyone has torches in their hands. There's a lot of noise, and people, it's quiet at night. People can hear. As we know that at night, sound travels a lot further than during the day. So if you're going to make a ruckus, you're going to see it be much more noticeable at night than during the day. Even the Belayla boy Gavra, you say you need extra people besides the people helping carry. You need people carrying torches. Boy Medukri the night, you need also torches. Afshamilsa, which will attract more attention to do it at night. So in this case, discretion is by day. Rashi learns they're equal day and night. Others say by day is far more discretion. The Shoyle Pishtonim and Amisha will stop over here. The one has a fascinating discussion now. We'll continue tomorrow in Mitzvah Shem.